Summer we saw the body. I knew immediately that the body on the sidewalk wasn't a drunk passed out or someone who'd just done a faceplant and was about to get up laughing. Not in a million years could you mistake it for that. It was too still, so still it seemed like everything around it stopped breathing too. We were just coming back from the corner store. My freezy was melting into a heavy red snake inside its tube, and the corners of my mouth stung where they'd been rubbed raw by the plastic edges. I was wearing my brother's old flip-flops, clenching my toes so they didn't slip off. The sun was hot and bright in a way that made everything seem flat. "Oh my God," said Jenny. "Oh my God." Jenny's hair always hung stiffly, like she'd just gotten out of the swimming pool, which she usually had. Jenny was a really good swimmer, even though she'd never taken lessons. She'd dive right down and touch the bottom of the deep end and bring pennies and plastic barrettes up with her. In the summer, her hair went green from all the chlorine. Jenny's freezy had turned her lips blue and purple. Her blue mouth was open in a wide circle that she covered up with her hand. The body was lying on the cement right in front of my family's apartment building. I knew without seeing his face that it belonged to Beezer Halliday. Beezer wore board shorts every day of his life. That day, his shorts had palm leaves and sunglasses all over them. Beezer lived in the apartment right above my family's. We didn't know him all that well, but we could always hear his music coming down through the floorboards, and I had his favorite songs memorized by their bass lines. Every day around noon, we'd see him walk over to the corner store with his hair sticking up to buy a pack of smokes and a case of beer. Once, I was hanging around outside the corner store when he came out, and I asked him for a cigarette. He made me give him a quarter for it and told me to stay in school. I smoked it with Jenny in our spot in the alley beside the train tracks. It made us fall on the ground laughing and coughing, our legs like jelly and our heads so heavy it felt like there was a huge hand pressing us down into the earth. Jenny was my best friend. She was 13, like me, and her older sister was the same age as my brother. Her dad drove a truck all over the country. When he was home, Jenny spent a lot of time at my house. Jenny's dad had a big grin and called everyone kiddo, but whenever he got drunk, he fought like crazy with Jenny's mom. He'd slam his hands down on the dinner table or throw the toaster oven at the wall. He'd kick over the rubber boots and they'd fly around and bounce off each other like people in balloon suits. It was funny in a way. Once he threw all the chairs in the house out on the front lawn. After he'd calmed down, he'd go buy Jenny's mom flowers from the grocery store, even though she hated flowers. He just couldn't help it. A woman from across the street rushed over to Beezer's body and started howling like a cat, and people started opening their screen doors and windows. The woman was pulling at Beezer's hair and clothes. Her earrings were whipping around her face, catching the sunlight. She was always over at Beezer's. Sometimes she'd make him dance with her on the balcony. I think her name was Soleil. She yanked on Beezer's shoulder to roll him over, and someone yelled, "Careful!" like they'd forgotten Beezer was dead and couldn't be hurt by anything. She didn't listen. She just rolled him over onto his back. There was blood all over the front of him, so bright it looked completely fake. It reminded me of maraschino cherries. Soleil grabbed Beezer's head. Her fingers were like claws. Beezer's eyes were open, and there was absolutely nothing inside of them. Once last fall, I was walking home at night, and I passed Beezer on the sidewalk near our building. It was dark, but the streetlights lit everything up yellow. Beezer tried to grab me as I walked past, but I sidestepped and kept going. He smelled like sweat and beer. "Show me your tits," he yelled. I just kept walking. "Hey girl," he crooned after me. "You're gonna marry me someday." I didn't turn around. "Fuck you, bitch," he yelled. I don't think he really recognized me, but it was hard to tell. The police and the ambulance showed up pretty quickly, their flashing lights all bleached out by the sun. The police walked all over the grass, pushed the neighbors back, and put tape up everywhere. They went up into Beezer's apartment and looked down at everyone from the balcony. The paramedics picked Soleil up. They checked Beezer's neck for a pulse, which seemed stupid, then put a sheet over him and buckled him onto a stretcher. Instead of going home, Jenny and I went to the park and sat on a picnic table and swung our legs around. It felt like all of my internal organs had disappeared and every inch of space inside my body was filled with loud radio static. We stayed there until the sun went down and the mosquitoes came out, and Jenny went to her house and I went to mine. When I got there, I saw that someone must have hosed off the sidewalk already. You couldn't see even a trace of blood. Everything looked normal. Inside, Mom had just gotten home from work. She was on the phone, probably talking to Sandra. They were talking about Beezer. Mom didn't know his name, so she just kept calling him the neighbor. She was leaning her hip against the balcony door, which she'd cracked open, blowing smoke outside into the darkness. She was still wearing her uniform, but she had taken her socks off. Her feet looked fat and soft. She'd brought Burger King home for supper, and the bag was on the floor beside her. She started crying on the phone. I went into my room and lay down on my bed, but the pillows felt like they were going to suffocate me, so I lay down on the floor. I could hear my mom still crying and talking to Sandra. I was hungry, but I felt weird going out and taking the Burger King bag from Mom while she was crying, so I rolled over and stared at all the dust under my bed. I thought about Soleil's claw-shaped hands. I thought about Jenny's blue, freezy-stained lips making the words, "Oh my God," over and over. After Beezer died, Jenny started laughing all the time. Her eyes were extra bright and her hands fluttered around and tugged at her hair and her clothes. She started coming over to my house every day. We made microwave noodles and toast and listened to music. We rode the bus around and around the neighborhood. We went to the pool pretty much every day. We practiced diving and took turns holding our breath underwater. I would count out loud, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and watch Jenny's green hair float around her shoulders under the surface. At night, Jenny usually asked to sleep over. We stayed up late, sitting cross-legged on my bed and telling our fortunes with cootie catchers, kissing the paper edges back and forth, unfolding and refolding the flaps. You're going to be famous. You're going to marry Aaron Linklater. You're going to have 7 children, except one will die. You're going to drive an Audi. When we got tired, we lay down flat under the covers, side by side in the dark, our shoulders and elbows and hips touching. Beezer's death didn't make the news, but my brother heard it was an accident. He said Beezer had just fallen over his balcony railing. He said that sometimes people can survive falls from 3 stories, but sometimes they don't get so lucky. Beezer used to have a dog named baby girl Beretta. She was burly and sweet and the color of caramel. Beezer used to take her for walks sometimes, but mostly she lay on his balcony and watched people go by. Last spring, she got hit by a car. Beezer scooped her up like an armful of laundry and rushed her to the vet in someone's car, but he came back by himself. Later, I saw him sitting on the front step. I noticed his eyes were red. "I'm really sorry about Beretta," I told him. He didn't say anything back. He just shrugged, just held his hands up, soft and open and empty. One night, Jenny was sleeping over, and my brother was out with his friends and Mom was at work, so the apartment was very quiet. The only sounds we could hear were things like the refrigerator and traffic outside, and every now and then someone shouting down the street. "I've never seen that before," Jenny said suddenly. Her voice floated around the room in the darkness, not attached to anything. "What?" I said. I could feel her breathing beside me. "I've never seen anyone dead before your neighbor." "Me neither." "I dream about it like every night," she said. I felt her shrug her shoulders. For some reason I nodded, even though I hadn't even dreamed about it once. "Yeah, me too," I said. Jenny turned over to look at me. I could see the outline of her face like the darkness was more solid where she was. I could feel her looking at me. For a second, she didn't say anything. "Nobody knows what it's like except for you," she said finally. My rib cage squeezed too tightly around my lungs. I looked at a different patch of darkness and nodded. Jenny reached out and found my hand. She fit her fingers in between my fingers. Then we stared up at the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and I listened to her breathing until I finally fell asleep. About a week after Beezer died, Jenny and I were at the swimming pool doing cannonballs off the diving board, and Jenny started doing belly flops instead on purpose. When she came out of the water, the whole front of her body was red. "That hurts so much," she yelled. "You do it." We'd heard that water is as hard as cement when you do a belly flop, but it's not true. The water hits you like the world's biggest slap, and it hurts like crazy, but right after that, you go through into the cool blue water. If you open your eyes, you'll see tiny, sparkling air bubbles all around your body. I don't think anyone has ever died from doing a belly flop. "That was awful," I yelled when I surfaced. Jenny laughed at the look on my face, which made me laugh. We went to buy creamsicles from the concession stand, giggling and saying, "Oh my God, look what it did. I can't believe how much it hurt," and rubbing our hands across the angry red skin on our bellies. We ate our creamsicles sitting on our towels, shivering as our skin dried off in the sun. Jenny had fat drops of water at the ends of her hair and on her shoulders and on her eyelashes. She hugged her knees into her chest and dug her chin into her arms and looked at nothing. Then she got up and wiped her face with her arm. Let's do it again, she said. There was a funeral for Beezer, but no one in the neighborhood was invited. It was just for Beezer's family, who apparently were all doctors that lived across the city. I wondered where Beezer's body was buried, or if he had been burnt up into ashes, but there was no one to ask. A couple of weeks after the funeral, Jenny convinced her sister to buy us a 6-pack of Palm Bay grapefruit coolers. We went to the hidden ditch beside the train tracks to drink them. We clinked our cans together and the liquid spilled over onto our hands. Jenny drank hers really fast. They were sweet and fizzy like pop, but bitter underneath. I like what it does to my head, Jenny giggled, and my skin. She was tracing her hand across her face. Everything feels soft and thick. I felt my own skin with my own thick fingers, and suddenly we were both laughing really hard. A train went by above us and shook the ground. Jenny howled like a dog, but we couldn't even hear it because the train was so loud. We each opened another can and cheered towards the train. It was a passenger train, and we saw people's faces whipping past us. They looked surprised to see us, which made us laugh even harder. My stomach muscles ached. "Stop making me laugh," I yelled, flailing my arm at Jenny and whacking her across the knees. "I can't," she yelled, hiccuping. She tipped the can up to her mouth and gulped the rest down. "I would put this stuff on my breakfast cereal," she yelled, grabbing another can from her backpack. "I'd put it in my coffee. I'd drink it with my morning paper. I'd make my butler buy it every day." I lay down on the grass. My whole body was spinning like I'd just gotten off a merry-go-round, or the world was spinning and I was holding still. I couldn't tell. Jenny lay down next to me. I rolled towards her, and my brain felt like it took a long time to come with my body. I could see the misshapen freckles across her cheeks, and the skin that was peeling on the end of her nose. She smelled like chlorine and grapefruit. Her arm was touching mine, and her hairs were tickling my skin. The grass felt wet and prickly under my cheek. She was so close it was hard to keep her face in focus. She looked serious suddenly, and her eyes were bright and glossy. "You're the only person I want to be around," she said. I had a crazy, reckless feeling in my body, like all my molecules were vibrating, like I could still feel the train shuddering through my bones. And suddenly, I just did it. I don't know why, but I wiggled towards her and sort of fell into her a little, and my hair fell on top of her face, and I kissed her mouth, or actually I mostly kissed my own hair because it was in the way. I had never been this close to another person before. All her features looked unfamiliar from this close-up. It was like when you think you see someone you know, but when they turn around you realize it's a complete stranger. Her lips were surprisingly soft. All I could smell was her breath and her skin. Jenny didn't say anything. She just stood up really fast. She bent to pick up her backpack, and hair swung in front of her face, but when she stood up I saw it was closed and hard-looking. Then she ducked back through the chain-link fence and walked away down the alley. I just lay where I was, on the ground. I wanted to puke or run or scream or laugh or cry, but I didn't. I didn't move a single muscle. I just lay there while the world spun idiotically around me, and I looked up at the trees. In August, 2 men came with a van and put all of Beezer's stuff in it and drove away. They left some boxes of junk behind on the curb. A week after that, an old woman with 3 little dogs moved into Beezer's old apartment. Her name was Joan. She liked to watch TV shows with laugh tracks in the afternoon, and she went to bingo pretty much every day. I wondered if she knew a person had died in front of our apartment building, but I didn't say anything to her. I went to the pool and the corner store. I rode the bus around. I found myself avoiding Jenny's street without exactly meaning to. And then one day I saw her by accident. I was going to the pool, and suddenly there she was, walking down the sidewalk towards me. She had a grocery bag in her hand. Her stiff hair was tucked behind her ear, and she was chewing on some gum. "Hi," I said. "Hi," she said. I noticed we were both wearing the same t-shirt. We had gotten them from the rec center last summer. They were blue with smiling suns and the words "Summer Days Community Camp" on them. "I was just going to the pool," I said. "Want to come?" She shrugged. "Not really," she said. She was staring at me, not blinking at all. We stood on the sidewalk in our matching blue t-shirts. I wanted to say something crazy so she would laugh and things would go back to normal, but I couldn't think of anything. "What?" she said. "Nothing," I said. I could feel my feet inside of my shoes. "Look," she said, "I'm not going to tell anyone if that's what you're so worried about." She was still staring at me, chewing her gum. Then she said, "I have to go." So I said, "Okay," and then I walked away down the street. When Jenny and I were both 8, She invited me to come over to her house after school. We watched TV and made up a game where we each took turns eating raisins. That was the whole game. I would eat a raisin, and then Jenny would eat a raisin, and then I would eat one, and we would laugh. We ate so many raisins our guts seized up, and then we rolled around howling on the floor, clutching at our bellies, until her mom finally yelled at us to calm down. At the pool, I spread my towel out on the cement. I did some cannonballs. Then I dunked my head underwater and counted in my head, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. My cheeks were stretched tight with air. I opened my eyes. The chlorine stung, but the water was the color of tropical beaches. Sunlight was streaking down through the water and making patterns on the bottom of the pool and the skin of my greenish underwater arms. There was a snarl of hair on the floor, moving gently in the water. There were bodies of kids all around me, swimming and jumping, but I couldn't hear them. In fact, I couldn't really hear anything at all, just my heart pumping in my ears. I counted to almost 2 minutes before I had to come back up for air.